Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of First Person. I'm your host, Alejo Largo. And as you know, this podcast is all about the journeys of immigrants and first generation individuals who've created something meaningful, whether that's a business, a cultural project, or a personal leap. And at the heart of this show is a simple belief that your lived experiences, especially as an immigrant or someone from an immigrant family, can shape what you build and even make you a better entrepreneur, creative, or builder. And I'm very excited to introduce today's guest, Sonny Caberwal. Sonny is a first generation American raised in a tight knit Sikh family in a small town in North Carolina. And he's a lawyer turned entrepreneur, a former model, a musician for the renowned band Thievery Company, and now a parent and founder of Legends, a startup focused on teaching kids confidence and values for the real world. So, in this episode, we talk about what it means to grow up between cultures, how embracing what makes you can become your superpower, and how your identity can shape not just what you create, but how you move through the world. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Sunny. Sunny, welcome to First Person. So glad to have you here.
I'm glad to be here, Alejo. I'm always excited by what you're doing. And this is a topic I think is very near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And for those for those that might not know, like we actually, Sonny and I know each other. We work together in our past lives. I had kept in touch, ever since. But so today, Sonny, I would say I'd love for us to dive into identity and really kind of the role that lived experiences play in what we create. So I actually would like to maybe start at the beginning, right? So can you tell us a little bit more about growing up in a small town in North Carolina as a part of a Sikh family, and how did young Sunny navigate all of this?
Yeah, I think unintentionally, I think like a lot of people, you're just trying to figure it out. I wasn't someone who was like, this is what my future holds. And I think when people meet me, they're surprised to hear that I grew up in a really small town in North Carolina, and then they're surprised even further to find out how much I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe it's because I grew up in a place where I grew up in a way, one of the most important things that my parents taught me when I was younger is that how you see yourself really matters.
Mhm.
And so, my dad came to the United States in the early 70s, and he was among the first Sikh people um, in the state of North Carolina. And
Oh,
so
wow.
there were no really visible minorities that were from, certainly no Indian people
Mhm.
in our town. It was a very small place, and he walked into that because he saw opportunity, and they needed doctors. He was a doctor, um, and very quickly he found that he had to establish commonality. But he grew up and he brought and surrounded himself with a lot of community. So we grew up in a very like a very tight knit immigrant community. Growing up, we were always driving around to see uh, other Indian people and Sikh people. I remember one experience I had that was really transformational. Was we would go to any city we'd go to, they'd pick up the phone book and they
Mhm.
would look for, back in the days, in any hotel, in the Holiday Inn, they would look through and they would look for people that had common Punjabi, Sikh last names, and they would just call them up, which
Yeah.
I thought was like a very specific. It struck me as very odd. However, what was even more odd is that the people would pick up the phone and invite us over for dinner,
I was
and
gonna
we
say, yeah,
would
like,
hang out with them, and we would
yeah.
hang out. That's how we would navigate. It doesn't matter where we'd go. We would just go immediately, call people up, and we would go, and they would invite us over to their house. And it wasn't until I was much older till I realized like that's an incredible gift. We talk a lot about in modern society about the idea of isolation, um, and how everyone feels more alone and they hate each other. But I think in immigrant communities, the exact opposite is true. They're very tight knit, they're very close, and you develop it permeates. You almost like can transmit culture and community uh, directly into your children. So I was very fortunate um, to grow up in that environment, and my parents were also really positive people.
Hmm.
They uh, they always were able to find out things that they had in common with other people. So growing up in the
Yeah.
rural deep South, they were people. They realized that with the communities there, they shared a strong sense of family values and in spirituality, and so that I think helped them find things in common, even though they didn't have a common religion. But my dad always told me, ultimately you need to be able to see yourself, your difference as a strength, not a weakness. It's a decision that you make, and I
Yeah.
think
That's
that
deep.
was the most powerful framing that has carried through my life, both as an entrepreneur and now as a parent.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. So these communities were they from all over the place, or they? So you mentioned, right, like some of them were from India, but did you also talk, had were you exposed to Latin cultures, to, yeah, I guess other cultures? Is that the
No, I
same?
mean, honestly, we grew up spending time almost entirely with Sikh people.
Yeah.
People,
Okay. Yeah.
people in the Sikh religion, and we lived two different lives. I mean, my parents
Mm.
never, I went to school. They didn't know anything about what the culture of my school was like and what it was like growing up. And I'm sure they were concerned on some level, but they didn't appear to have any concerns with how I fit in with everyone else. They're like, that's for those people. And
Yeah.
for us, this is how we do things in our house.
You had the foundation, right? Like that came from them.
Yeah. And it was, some people, we didn't, we spent time with other families like us. And we were very much, it was very much, we went over to people's houses, but we were not immersed in American culture at home, although we were watching TV and doing other things. So that gave us a very strong sense of who we were. You know,
Hmm.
it gave us a very strong sense of spirituality, religion, identity, and culture. It permeated everything: music, food, um, who we saw, value systems. And I think that helped us that helped me certainly see the world in a different way, even though I was navigating the exact same world as my peers.
Yeah, and like one thing that I'm curious about is creating connections, right? Because I think like you're talking about, right, like how you're creating, these connections, with your community. But I think once you actually went outside the community, whether it was at school or even maybe once you actually went to the university, right? That idea of actually being able to talk to other groups of people, right, and be able to kind of create connections, is that something that came easy for you, in terms of being able to go to someone else and establish some type of relationship, right? Or is that something that you had to work, at as you grow up?
It certainly wasn't a part of my life growing up. Like I think now I'm a very social person. I think I
Yeah.
have a relatively easy time meeting new people.
Hmm.
But that was not how little young Sonny was.
Was that a little older?
Yeah, young Sonny in elementary school would not really relate to who I am today in some
Mm.
ways because I was very very quiet and very much kind of observing and on my own, and because I didn't know what I had in common with people, I just knew what I
Mm.
liked, and at the same time, I realized that when you're not really like anyone else, you don't belong to any group. If you don't belong to any group, you can belong to every group. And that was
Yeah.
something that I learned as I got older in high school and college. Everybody is far more alike than they are different. It's just we
Yeah.
focus on the differences disproportionately. And when
Hmm.
you're able to see past that and really see how much everyone has in common, then everybody can be your friend. And you really understand that you basically have a very strong foundation of who you are. Everybody actually has a strong foundation of who they are. I think people who grow up in first generation immigrant communities
Yeah.
are given a gift of difference. And that gift of difference sometimes is very hard to understand when you're young. The problem is, most people, you can be taught that your difference can be a liability. And that is
Hmm.
an incorrect way of looking at it. Or I felt it's a very self limiting way of looking at things
Yeah.
because, many people try to fit in your whole life. I remember, I think that's something that's pretty common. A lot of like immigrants directly and first generation kids can out. They were trying to figure out how do they fit in with everybody else. Instead, what I think people needed to learn, what I needed to learn was how was I okay standing out? Because standing out is what's really valuable. In fact, a lot of people do things to stand out. When you're an entrepreneur, you really are focusing on your difference and what makes you you. Why you versus someone else.
Yeah.
And as immigrants, that's why I think this topic is so important. You have a natural gift, and sometimes people are erroneously taught that that is something that is a liability. That is
Hmm.
a thing to be overcome. Your accent is a thing to be overcome. Your lack of knowledge about this topic is a thing to be overcome. Um, that though is really what gives you a unique perspective and gives you a driving differentiation.
Yeah.
Like really, only those who are willing to be different ever really make a difference. Most people are trying to find a way that they can stand out and be special. And as people who have a strong sense of culture and identity, you already have been given this gift, and it's something that should be embraced and tapped into as your superpower.
But it's interesting. I think in my mind, curiosity plays a huge role because there needs to be curiosity for you to be able to understand yourself and to get to know yourself and explore or define what it is that you stand for, which really does take a little bit of time to figure out. But then also curiosity to reach out, curiosity to talk to someone and to find that commonality, right? Is that I'm curious to kind of hear your reaction around like maybe like curiosity being one of the ways that you can kind of set the differentiation.
Yeah, I think curiosity is one way to look at it, but like you have to go, why am I curious about these things? But when you're different from everybody else, or when you feel like you're different, or even a lot of times for me, people feel like they're very different than I am. And
Hmm.
I know that we're not that different.
Yeah.
That's a better way of describing it because I'm so visually different than most people, right?
Hmm.
Wearing a turban is a very specific thing. People feel like I must be so foreign to them, right?
Yeah.
So, in those circumstances, the best way is to find commonality. And in fact, one of the things that someone taught me when I was younger was the best one of the best ways to meet people is to find what you have in common in the fewest number of questions possible.
Mm.
Because it turns out we're all mostly alike and everybody has something in common. And when you can figure that
Yeah.
out, it's amazing. And as a creative and as entrepreneurs, and honestly, how we met, one of the best ways to do that is to find, is not really to go with open curiosity, but to go with admiration.
Mm.
So,
Yeah. Respect. Yeah.
yeah. So, for instance, how we met is I came upon your work, and I liked it, and I admired it,
Hmm.
and I saw you out, if you remember, and I was like, I really like your work, and
Yeah.
and that's how we became friends, right?
Yeah.
It's a very simple way of doing things. It's just to
Hmm.
to surround yourself with people that you admire, and usually you admire it because they can do something different than you do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. They complement you and they help you improve. Improve, get better.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be complimentary to you. You could just, I mean, I can't think of a better word in how I've thought about this a lot. Like,
Yeah.
who are the people that I want to surround myself with? They're people who I admire, and I admire them because they have it, they're different than I am in some way that I value that difference. I can learn from them. They don't have to directly teach me, but just by being around them, I can pick up on something. And in a way, you have like some gratitude for their difference, right? And I think it's not, so whether someone has a different culture than you do is almost secondary. Do they have something that's different than you do in a way that you admire? That's amazing. Now it
Yeah.
turns out when you come from a different culture or a different community, you have a different perspective, and that perspective
Mhm.
is often the key that gives you some unique insight. And ultimately, I
Yeah.
think that's where that's that tracks the period of when I started maturing past like, oh, I'm not like everyone else, to being like, oh, that actually is my advantage, that I'm not like everyone else. And also I'm so much like everyone else. Like everyone else is basically the same. Like when I got to
Yeah.
college, a lot of South Asians were pre-med where I went to
Mhm.
school at Duke, and it was in the late 90s. And there's still a lot of like I would call underlying racial tension and just between black people and white people.
Yeah.
And I remember, since I was didn't fit into any group, I realized all of a sudden that like nobody cared if I was in any group. So I could go to any one of the different groups or parties or events.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, I met all these great people, but all of them were basically the same. If you're an 18-year-old in the United States
Yeah.
and
What's
you're at
important to
university,
you?
what's
Yeah.
important to you basically the same things if you go to a party.
Yeah.
Everybody is the same. The music is the
Mhm.
same. The activity is the same. The goals are the same.
Mhm.
Um, and yet there was no place. And I was learning so much from people who were different than I was. It's like every time I talked to someone, I was like amazed at how it was just interesting, right?
Mhm.
And no one else could go to like none of my white friends could go hang out with any of the black friends I had because there's no place to go, and none of the black friends could go to the white friends because there was just this assumed difference that was breaking things down. So I went to the university and I asked for money to throw parties.
Mhm.
That was how I became an entrepreneur. Actually, I started raising money
Was
to
was that
throw
was that
parties.
the yeah was that the first moment, or like the first, where it just clicked for you, or
Yeah, like well, I just realized if you ask and you have an idea and it
yeah.
makes sense, people will people will give you money to do those things if it creates value. And that became what's now the Center for Race Relations at Duke.
Mhm.
Started as a series of parties to try to bring different groups of people together, and they were
Yeah.
very successful. I mean, the first time
Mhm.
we did one, there were, something like 30% of the entire university's campus showed up because I just anchored around the common design. The
Yeah.
only uncommon thing is that I picked exactly what transcended everybody's different cultural differences and I put them in one place, and I got the right people there at the beginning.
Yeah.
And that made me realize that you can build behind that kind of a unique insight. I've been doing that almost, that was 25 years ago.
Is it?
That's what I've been doing ever since.
Do you know if they still have something like that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
like it's still a thing.
It's a thing.
I think
Yeah.
the culture has changed where there is a little bit more. We for all of the talk of divisiveness in our country today. You know, I think America is still an extremely extremely tolerant place,
Mm.
and I think we might forget how difficult it used to be for people back in the day. I remind
Yeah.
I implore everyone to go back and watch the movies from the 90s and see exactly what the culture was like, the popular culture,
Yeah.
with like how were minorities portrayed, what were the stereotypes portrayed, and I think that we'd be like, "Oh wow, you know, it was not so simple. Like it's not like you walked up to people who were different than you and it wasn't celebrated. In fact, even in my
Yeah.
own experience, the only reason I was a fashion model isn't because I portrayed difference. It's because it was a backlash against people who look like I did. And so it was supposed to be something that was positive.
Yeah, like it became an opportunity to
It became an,
change, right?
yeah, to
Yeah,
create positive change. That was 2007. I mean, that was almost 20 years ago.
yeah. I think that's fascinating. And like, I think one of the things, because as I've been thinking about it, as even like your experience at, in college. Obviously, I went to school in New York, which it's its own bubble. And I think one of the things that I think was actually really interesting was kind of similar to what you were saying. Once I came to the US, when I was 17 and I started, I came for college, and it was interesting to see how there was actually not as much division. I think as you were kind of referring as Duke at Duke, but at the same time, it was the School of Visual Arts where I went to school. It was very I think diverse, and there was actually a lot of immigrants. So we did actually ended up just kind of having groups of people that the common experience I think like was we are in this new city and we're excited about exploring this city and we want to study art and we want to learn, right? So I think it was cool. I think to be able to like to start. I think defining, what the identity, what my identity was, like me being as a Colombian, but now all of a sudden being having the opportunity to take my foundation, but then evolve it and create something, kind of where I am today, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, I think like a little bit of that journey of uh, finding commonalities, I think is something that kind of really resonated. I think as you were kind of mentioning a little bit before.
Yeah, the thing is, listen, Duke wasn't filled with hateful people who all hated
No,
each
no, no,
other. I
no, of
think
course
that,
not.
I think that people
Yeah,
tend to stick to people that they understand. Let me tell you how and why I care so much about this idea of
yeah,
immigrant, the power of immigrant. It's like I was born to the children of immigrants, but I'm not an immigrant myself.
hmm,
In fact, and I think a lot of people who are in my shoes, the first generation being born in the United States, you grow up with a feeling of resentment sometimes because you don't know how hard it is. You're like, why don't my parents understand? My parents didn't know about prom or like what the cultural expectations, the music, everything was just different, right?
hmm,
Um, I never really appreciated though the the bravery and the risk and the why of it all and how does it work and the gift, of these communities
hmm.
until I actually moved to India to the dismay of my parents. They were shocked. They moved from India to the United States 50 years ago.
And you went back.
And they're like, our stupid kid goes and moves back to India, which is not a thing that many people do when they're born and raised in the United States, particularly not like, 15 years ago, you
Yeah,
know? Um, and I have to tell you, when I went and lived in India, I thought, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be near my people, and it doesn't feel that way. When you grow up in the United States, I was an American immigrant, and I understood because anytime I heard someone with like a Brooklyn accent, I would immediately be like, oh hey, what's up? And they'd be like, oh, how's
yeah,
it going? You want to come over and hang out? And sure enough, what ends up happening is you have pockets of people who have commonality, and they feel like that they miss those things, their values,
hmm,
and they stick together in a way that's actually quite good, right? And it's
yeah,
nice. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to celebrate your culture and your understanding. And I appreciated that when I was thinking about American culture and living in India, right? So when we think about like this idea of shared experience, everybody in a weird way, even in college, is in a shared experience. They're all going
hmm,
through it at the same time. That's what the purpose of an alumni network is, a weirdly kind of like a shared experience. You're all 18-year-olds leaving your house, most of you for the first time, and living in a place together and establishing your collective shared identity. It's a
yeah.
really powerful thing.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I think you were also able to design your own curriculum, right? As when you were at Duke.
Yeah.
How did that, like, was that part of you trying to figure out a new way of doing things figure out your own way of doing, kind of pursuing your interests and
I
and
think
your passions?
I think I started asking why really early in life. And I
Hmm.
think that was really helpful. I think I would encourage everyone who's thinking about this with their own kids or themselves, and like, why do I do these things? Like, why does the culture work that way? Um, and when you start asking why from a young age, you both learn a lot of information that's really
Yeah.
important. Like, I don't think you should culture for culture's sake or religion for religion's sake is very thin if you don't understand why it has value, right?
Yeah.
So I think I was really fortunate to live in an environment, in a family, in a community that wasn't just like, that's the way it is, but they're like, they try to give me explanations that made sense to me, right?
Yeah.
But then when I got to school, you start reasoning from first principles. And this is how, that was my very beginning spark of interest in education. You're like, how come I can't learn the things that I want to learn um, in school? If I have to pay all this money to go to school, how come they're restricting my choices in classes? So I asked.
Yes,
I
that's another
went to the
example of
administration
asking.
and I asked. I
Yeah.
just was like, "What? Why? I don't understand. I don't want to take these science classes.
Yeah.
I actually didn't want to take science classes. That was a whole exercise, and I
Yeah.
felt like I wasn't going to do well. I wasn't interested in doing it." And they have a program for like exceptional students. I was not an exceptional student, but um, I think for people who know what they want to do, you can design your own curriculum because you're like very self driven. I was not self driven around. I didn't know that, but I was like, I know what I don't want to do.
Mhm.
But since then, I was like, wait, I can design my own curriculum. Anything I want to study, they're like, yeah, sure, if you like write it up, which is like a business plan almost. I
Yeah.
was like, okay, yeah, sure. What do I want to study? I wanted to study how different cultures. I mean, this is like 1997, so I
Yeah.
was like, oh, the internet's becoming a thing. I was really interested in how like Indian music was being fused with electronic music, and the idea of globalization was starting then.
Hmm.
So I wanted to study how cultures impacted globalization and what that meant. You
Yeah.
know, early internet era. So that's what I made my major. It was called first. It was called Colliding Cultures, and I
I
told
love
all
it.
my friends, and they literally laughed at me. I'm not kidding. They organized a giant group of people, and everyone mocked me and laughed at me because it was a ridiculous name. They're like, "That you're gonna have, you're definitely not gonna have a job
Right.
if you ever do that."
Did you come up with that name, or was
Yeah, I
it
was like,
what
"Oh,
is the
it's
name?
great!" Because Colliding Cultures, and I thought I was so cool. I came, I went and
Right.
told my friends, and there was like one bar on campus, and they thought it was so funny. They stood outside all night. Every 500 people in a row, they would like, "Hey, do you want to hear what his major is?" They're like, "Just tell them." And I was like, "Colliding Cultures," and people would like laugh in my face and go inside and have a good time. I was the butt of the joke.
Yeah.
So the next day, I changed it because you can name it whatever you want. So I named it International Business and Globalization, which is a far more respectable name.
That's yeah. That sounds
And
great.
I changed exactly nothing else except for the name.
Yeah.
I also learned the power of brand,
Right.
and that's what I studied. And I got a grant to travel around. I love the idea. That's like, wait, if you just ask for stuff and you have a good idea,
Mhm.
people will support you. So I got a grant to go travel around with my friend and study club culture in Europe and how music from different cultures changed how people felt about the culture. And I would go to like clubs with my
Yeah.
best friend, and I knew my parents would never let me do it.
Mhm.
They were like they wouldn't even understand. My parents were very very conservative people.
Yeah. I
They
mean,
would
like
never
just you
they
going out
wouldn't
in.
even let me go. They would never even let me. The
Right.
idea of me going to Europe and getting like a Eurail pass and traveling around.
Going to clubs.
So I was
Yeah.
going. I was actually going to be studying in Oxford in the summer, and before that, I took this grant money, and my friend and I were going to go conduct research in clubs around Europe, which is a preposterous idea for them to understand. Impossible. So when they found I was doing it, I was already in Europe. I had already gone. I'd
Ah.
left out the
Okay.
part that I was traveling around
Yeah.
studying club culture. And I told them what I was doing, and they thought that I stole the money and they wanted me to give it back. They're like, that's not true. You must have stolen this. But I was like, no, you don't understand. They gave me the money to do it.
Yeah.
And they couldn't believe that a society would do such things. A school would do. They're like, that's a joke.
that you just needed to ask, right? To to do it.
They still don't know. They
Yeah.
barely understand the idea. They're like, I don't understand. Get a safe job.
Yeah.
It's weird how I think a lot of times in my experience, immigrant families both tend to be take tremendous risks for the benefit of their life and also seem to be incredibly risk averse for people
Mm,
who like left everything behind. It's no
right.
joke, man. I look at the people around me. It's like to leave and to leave your country and go and move to another country. If you ask any of my friends now, if I'm like, hey, I've done it. I mean, we just lived in Greece for a year. We lived
Hmm.
in India. It is not that common to just quit what you're doing and move to another country because you think it's going to be better.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of guts.
It does.
Exactly
Yeah.
the kind of guts you need when you're going to go leave your job and start a new job as an entrepreneur. I guess that's why
Yeah.
it's such a fascinating subject. Yet, ironically, as soon as that change happens, a lot of times people forget that they have that power inside of them and they go, what's the safest job I can have here? How can
Yeah.
I eliminate risk? And that's a common entrepreneurial task because entrepreneurship is about reducing risk as much as possible. It's not about taking risks. You already
Hmm.
know you're likely to fail. It's about reducing risk, right?
Yeah. And getting more comfortable with risk, right? And getting more comfortable with potentially things not going well, which I think is not something that is natural, right? I would think to a lot of people.
Well, it's one of the things that's so interesting. It's like I think a lot about. I spent the last 5 years studying confidence full time,
Hmm.
and how do you take confidence research and make it actionable? And I would say the biggest misnomer about confidence is that it's like a belief that you're gonna get it right. That's
Yeah.
just not true. You've heard the saying, "Competence builds confidence."
Right.
That is only partially true,
Mm.
but it's not. That's not all there is. Real confidence comes from a comfort with failure. That's what it is. Like really confident people aren't as concerned with failure as they are. They don't believe they're going to get it right. They may
Yeah.
believe that they can pull it off, but they're also okay with getting it wrong. That's why they try in the first place,
Yeah.
you know? And you can be okay with it because you know that you've done everything possible to mitigate risk. But deep down, like something might go wrong.
So I think when I was first starting out professionally, I actually got laid off my second job, and it was a job that I loved. Like it was a small studio, and we were doing amazing work. But it just kind of happened that I got laid off, and it was kind of one of those moments where things were a little bleak at that time, and it was kind of like that moment of, in a way, failure, or in a way, just kind of like things just like kind of like not going my way. But I think like that was actually, I would say, one of the most important moments in my life, because it kind of made, it kind of took me to that point where, okay, this happened, and it was a little hard for a little while, but then I decided to go back to grad school, and I kind of created this whole new path that kind of took me to where I am now. I met my wife when I went back to grad school, and it actually ended up being almost like one of the best things that happened. But at the time, I didn't know that. At the time, it was something that it was something that wasn't good, and I guess there was a risk involved, and everything that happened there. But I think like one of the things that I've been kind of thinking a lot about is that, for me, that happening was that initial kind of point in terms of me being more comfortable with risk moving forward, right? So like for me, when I'm thinking about potentially changing jobs or potentially moving somewhere else, I feel a lot more comfortable because that happened, and it's fine, and it was fine. And that being kind of that catalyst for you to become more comfortable with change, with risk, and being able to actually try new things and kind of have that curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you're bringing that up because I think that it touches on this idea of knowing who you are, like being
Hmm.
comfortable with who you are. So there are three parts to confidence that I think are really relevant to um, people who have a connection with a different culture, whether they're immigrants or the children of immigrants. The first is that you have a strong sense of who you are, self-concept.
Yeah.
And one of the things in self-concept, one of the things that is really important is that you have the ability for happy people typically have the ability to look backwards on their life and make sense, a narrative that makes sense for them.
Hmm.
And people who can't do that actually are less happy.
Yeah.
So the fact that you're able to look back on something that didn't go well for you and create a narrative that makes you happy is a very important part of knowing who you are. The reason why I bring this up for
That's
people
interesting.
who are immigrants, yeah, like some people like just dwell in the past, like I don't know how this happened to me. Those
Yeah.
people typically tend to be unhappy, or that's like almost self-evident,
Yeah.
right?
You're victimizing yourself, or
Because
yeah.
you can't come up with a story for why that makes sense. And like
Hmm.
I get it. Like, listen, cancer wards are not filled with evil people,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
However, you have to understand, and typically, that there was something that came before you and something that comes after you. And
Yeah.
people, when they're tied to a culture and a community, really understanding where you come from sets that, path for where you can go. That whole
Yeah.
idea of like really like looking back on your own history to be able to understand what's coming in the future, right?
Hmm.
That's true from a cultural perspective as well. That's why I think instead of the idea of America being a melting pot where people conform to American culture, a single, monolithic culture, it would be much more powerful to have everybody understand where they come from in their own culture and celebrate it. Um, because it
Yeah.
gives us a far, and it's not just because that's like the right thing to do or it just sounds like a good thing to do. It's because bringing different perspectives even for yourself, helps you solve problems. What is solving a problem except for finding a new way to do something, right?
Yeah.
And to find a new way, you need to have different perspectives, right?
Hmm.
That's why entrepreneurs who have different backgrounds are likely to be more successful because they may have a different way. You can't have 100 people who have the same experience. What's the point? They're not going to have
Right.
if they don't, they have to have some unique experience difference in it. So
To
when
bring
you,
a new perspective in. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
so, and you can delve into that. You can find that through self-concept work.
Mm.
You don't have to be an immigrant to have a unique perspective on things. And in fact, like one of the things I love, for instance, is, in that you're connected to something bigger than yourself. We just moved to Texas recently.
Yeah.
And some people don't love that, like Texas seems to have its own culture. I love it. I think it's amazing. I think it's, in fact, very compelling that Texans are very proud of their own culture. I think it's awesome
Yeah.
because it gives people a sense that they're part of something bigger than they are, right? It gives them a sense of continuity and it expands their sense of self concept in a way that actually empowers them to do things more confidently.
Yeah.
It's that same route that we can draw on as an immigrant community and to go, oh, you know what? Like instead of going, oh, I wish I could just not be Colombian, right? You're like, why? You're part of something that's so big and profound. And now you showing up and being a design leader gives you the space and the right in the capacity to use your background, not just your own background, but the background of the people that came before you and
Yeah.
forge a new path in a way that nobody's ever done before.
Yeah. No. One
That's I
hundred
hope
percent.
my whole entrepreneurial journey is just that. Like
Yeah.
honestly, I tell my kids every time we talk about this, I tell them that the only reason I get to do what I do is because I'm different.
Mm. I think it's actually a really good segue. Is so now that you are a father of three, right, and you're starting to have these conversations because some of them are. Is 11 your oldest?
I have
Uh,
a 12-year-old daughter who's
12. 12
turning
year. Yeah.
almost 13-year-old daughter next week, and I have identical twin boys who are 10.
Yeah. So you're starting to have these conversations with them, right? So I'm curious what so far what's their take on it, like like in terms of how they are behaving out in the world, and um, just a little bit of kind of these conversations that you're starting to have with them around confidence, around identity, around asking why.
Well, I guess I have like a few things that we can dig into here. But
Yeah.
I'll say the first thing is entrepreneurship really, there are two ways to be an entrepreneur, right? One is to solve a problem that you have, right?
Hmm.
And another is to go looking for a problem to solve that you think, that you feel like you should solve because it makes you a lot of money or like it's the right thing to
Right.
do, right? Both are completely valid ways of being an entrepreneur and being a problem solver. I only know how to do the first way,
Yeah.
solve a problem that I fully understand. It's very hard for me to solve another problem. It seems like it's very difficult for me to work up the energy and the commitment to change my whole life, and anchor it around something that's like someone else's problem. So for me, I'm always solving problems that are basically an outcropping of my own, battle on perspective. And right now, the biggest problem I have is thinking about how do I help my kids learn the values that I think they need to be successful in the world,
Yeah.
right? And they're not going to learn them in school. School's not even designed to teach them that way. It's a giant, horrible problem that many people face, and I'd like to know the solution. I don't have the answer, but I'm looking hard.
Yeah.
Um, so the problem is I don't know how to teach them. We got really lucky because when you grow up in a place that like in my the community I grew up in, basically I no one had to teach us about values. The values were there. It was like hard work. They were lived values all the time. The cultural values and norms were imbued into us because there was no other culture and norm, you
Mm.
know. And I think that has proven to be very important to me in life in helping me understand not just how I show up at work, but how I show up in relationships and what my place is and role is in, from a spiritual perspective. Like, how do I make sense of the universe?
Mhm.
I have no idea how I can teach that to my kids. I honestly have no idea how I could teach that to my kids. I struggle
Yeah.
with that a lot, and I don't think I'm alone in that. If anyone else struggles with this, I would love to spin up a group and talk about it. It's very
Yeah. Let's make it
difficult
happen.
to.
Yeah.
It's difficult to recreate the power of what you got from your parents when you grow up in an immigrant community, and that is probably a very ripe place for entrepreneurs to go attack who are in the second
Yeah.
generation space, because you don't want to lose the values of the past
Mhm.
because they're really important to tell you what's going to happen in the future. Everything repeats itself over and over and over again. So it's like we keep throwing out the past to reinvent the future, and then someone comes along and throws out your past, and it's such a silly way of doing things. Instead,
Mhm.
we can carry forward some of these ideals and help families get ways that they can do it. So that's something I think about a lot. When I do, I try to reframe those things in ways that make sense to my kids. So the first thing is, we talk about like, what does identity mean? I just did this trip with my sons this past weekend.
Mhm.
And I was like, do you know why you look different? Why does that matter? And like, so I talked to them about what that means and like why I do it. And
Yeah.
I try to deliver to them the same values, that my parents gave to me, but in a way that's maybe a little bit more accessible and less like, you know, direct. And that
Yeah.
like, you know, you you're always going to be different. It doesn't even matter if they decided to not wear turbans. You're still going to be different. Every single human being is different, and you're probably going to feel more different than you are. But the second that you can figure out what your difference is and why it's valuable, right? You'll figure out where your power lies,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's like a thing that even little kids can understand, you know? Like
Yeah.
a gift is like, what is different about you than everyone else, and what comes easily to you that it doesn't come easily to everyone else. And you start building your life around those things, and instead of hiding from them and struggling with them and having to overcome them, you go, oh, this is what my power is.
Yeah. But I think it's fascinating to have the support. I think like here the parents I think is where they become really important because they if the kids have a support where they can go and try it. Because I think like that's probably as a kid you're going to try to figure out what that thing is for you, like how are you different, and some of it might be an internal kind of like introspective type of trying to understand yourself, but some of it might just be like how I relate to my cult, how I relate to the world, right? And that could mean trying different things, right? So like having the support to be able to go and try something. It might not be that, but it might actually give you something that will start kind of giving you, getting you on the path of identifying what it is, that one thing that makes you you.
Yeah, I think, but I think that there's this idea that kids are just going to figure out what they're good at, and some kids do, so we still believe that. But it's very frustrating for many parents,
Yeah.
including me, because most adults don't know what they're going to do. Why do you think that like your 12-year-olds aren't going to go running around trying to experiment what they're good at? It is a true gift when you figure that out early on. However,
Yeah.
what's simple and empowering for people that is to understand their differences, feel pride in them. Again, so let's go back to self-concept. A very simple thing is just telling positive stories. Like, you
Mhm.
understand, like, for self-concept, each human being is just a set of ideas. Like, who I am to you and who I am to me and who I am to my kids is three different versions of me,
Yeah.
right?
Different facets. Yeah.
No, the three
Oh, yeah.
fundamentally different versions. Like,
Mm,
it's a fiction. Whoever you think I am is a fiction,
mm,
right? It's not. That's just That's your set of ideas that make up me to you,
yeah.
right?
The perception. Yeah.
That's not who I am. So it doesn't matter what other people think of me. There's just a set of ideas, right?
Mhm.
What matters is what you think of you.
Yeah.
And you have to tell people what they won't know. They're not going to like dream up that they're from this culture or they have this value or that, uh, they're not going to understand. They're not going to understand the implied elements of like why I believe Punjabi culture is good unless I literally tell them or share them, you know?
Mhm.
So those are things that are really important. And that same thing, this is why it's double duty for parents and why I think it can be so impactful as an entrepreneur. Because you have to spend time on thinking about it, particularly if you grow up outside of that community. Let's say, you want to teach your children about, some aspect of Colombian culture, right?
Mhm.
That means you have to spend time thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
And guess what? All of a sudden, you're a designer sitting in New York thinking about Colombian culture, and voila, out falls ideas for
Mhm.
entrepreneurial ideas. You got to do the work anyway, man. If you
Yeah.
care, if you're if you are from an immigrant community and you care about your culture, it is imperative that you're able to articulate to yourself the values and components of that culture that matter.
Yeah.
Only
It,
then can you even share it with your kids. But
yeah.
once you can articulate it to yourself, it's like it shines out of you.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
No, at 100%. Because I think like I'll tell you like one thing from my perspective. Yes, being born and raised in Colombia, I think my identity as someone from Colombia has evolved. I think over time, because one of the things that has been interesting learning as I'm again moved to the US and just kind of try to uh, have a life here is that my relationship to what I perceive as Colombia has changed over time. So it used to be about the place. It used to be about the being there and the culture and the customs and the smells, the food, the sounds and all of those things. Right? I'm not there anymore. So my relationship to being Colombian, I think, has actually changed. And I bring this up because I think like one of the things that I'm personally very interested in is a little bit of that, right? Like there's where you came from, right? And the values that you might take from that. But then there's also the place that you've made your home, which might be a different place, right? So there's a duality there, in my perspective, right?
Oh,
Of
100%.
yeah,
Well, that's what I'm saying.
and
Like,
finding the balance. Yeah,
well, each person is a unique set of ideas. Well, that's what I'm
yeah,
like. Every
yeah,
human being is just a formulation of ideas, basically,
hmm
you know, and they're all different ideas. Each person is a different ideas depending on who's looking at it.
yeah,
So it's really important that each person takes the time to consider who that is for themselves. So I identify far more as a North Carolinian than I do as someone from India. I've been to India like a few times. I lived there a few
yeah,
years, you know.
hmm
However, that's a unique blend of culture that may enable me to appreciate certain things and find commonality in very specific areas,
yeah,
you know. Um, for instance, hunting is a thing that is a commonality between people where I grew up in North Carolina and where my grandfather grew up in Punjab.
interesting. Yeah, hmm
And because I understood that, when I went to Bavaria, I go to Munich a lot, I get along well with a lot of Bavarians
yeah,
because I'm like, oh, I understand that idea. And by the way, I don't even hunt, but I understand that's an important part of these cultural aspects that I identify with, right?
yeah,
And it really helps me see and navigate the world in a different way. And I think that's like really fun. And like everybody has that. It's not even like the right of immigrants. It's like everybody is from somewhere.
yeah,
We just, it's more obvious for people like us.
hmm
Every kid and every single person is a combination of unique backgrounds, and they get to choose which ones they identify with. You
yeah,
literally get to construct your identity. You get to construct your identity for you, and so it's imperative that people are able to do so um, in a way that is positive and reinforcing, and it is a very core part of what makes somebody confident.
yeah. And I mean, and it sounds. Would it be fair to say, obviously, Legends is all about confidence, and I think like it ties so much, so well with everything that we're talking about. So did you start Legends because of the, or was all the questions that everything that we're discussing, was that a big driver, behind why you wanted Legends as a way to answer the question for how do you help your kids kind of find what's unique about them?
Well, I think it was pretty kind of like that. I think the
Mhm.
big um, issue for that I was thinking about was what are the skills that my kids need to learn
Yeah,
for the future, and I started asking people, and when you see your kids that being hard on themselves, you see them basically, the outcome that you want is confidence. But like, what I didn't even was like, what does that mean?
yeah,
Right? Because
hmm
confidence, like you could be confident about, your day at school tomorrow and not confident about, doing something else. It's contextual, right? So as we went down that word that kept coming up in my own head and with, the hundreds of other families I started talking to, we started breaking down the research. That's how I learned all this stuff. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, and it's helped answer a lot of it. And I thought that it all makes so much sense when you really study it. Then you're like, okay, well, how do I give my kids those things? And I think it's going to be different from every family, but there are like really root principles. So again, just like every person is made up of different ideas because they're a unique blend of cultural experiences, everybody's sense of confidence derives from a different place,
yeah,
right? But what they always do, what confident people always do, is that they have the ability to see themselves in a positive light, right?
hmm
They have the ability to believe that they can do something, that they are capable, you know,
yeah,
because they've seen examples of that from their past, and they have the ability, they have the ability to be kind to themselves, even when things don't work out. And I
yeah,
think that if you really look at the story of a lot of people when they came here, almost everybody came to the United States. There's the country filled with immigrants.
yeah,
There are very few original people and you really
Hmm.
think about it. And so when those somebody decided they were going to take a big leap because they believed in themselves and they saw themselves as somebody worthy of opportunity, they saw their family as worthy of opportunity. That's a self concept. They
Yeah.
believed that even if it was going to be hard, that they could put themselves in a better position by coming to the United States, right?
Yeah.
They,
Hmm.
they believe the self efficacy. And they had the ability to pick themselves up when they fell down. And every person who's come here knows, like you just said, you fall on hard times, but you were able to get over it, right? Those are the three underlying principles that contribute to a strong sense of personal well being, right? And like
Yeah.
I said, we have immigrants are lucky because we have great examples all around us of people in our own life where you can look on your own self and go, you know what, I was able to do that. If you dig down deep enough, there's a reason you're here.
Yeah.
And that understanding that confidence, you can tap into that if you're thinking about how can you then draw and deliver in another aspect of your life. You talked about, like we've talked about, how do people find the confidence to become entrepreneurs and pursue their dreams, right?
Yeah.
Immigrants are halfway there. They
Hmm.
already did it.
Yeah.
The heart it isn't any different than going and saying, you know what, I can do this. I am someone who understands that this is better for me. I deserve this. I can do this. And even if it doesn't work out at the beginning, I'm going to find a way.
Yeah.
What else do you need to be an entrepreneur, really?
I think like that idea of like what you were saying before, find the problem that you want to solve and that only you can solve, right? Because it is your own, um, because it really kind of represents, so the what's unique about you, and go and do that. And one of the things, I think like actually we were talking about in previous conversations is that it can be it can be a startup, it can be a company, it can be a personal project, it can be a passion. I think like that idea of do not follow your passion, because I think like that as an advice is a little that's problematic. But I think like that idea of actually be able to find something and go pursue it. And if you fail, like then you go and try something else, right? But just kind of just go and do it. Just kind of take action. I think is one of the things that, again, I'm personally thinking a lot about, right? That not just kind of having the perfect idea, not just having or like even the whatever the success might be, but just actually doing something and kind of having that courage of getting started is something that, I mean, I feel like it connects really well, I think, with everything that you're talking about, confidence, everything you're talking about in terms of what makes an immigrant experience, and so forth.
Yeah, I don't think being an entrepreneur is a great job, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't, I think we talked about this before, but
Yeah.
this is my 20th year of being an entrepreneur. And under this turban is a head full of gray hair because, you age differently,
Yeah.
psychologically as an entrepreneur. And it's just a punishing way of doing things. I think we dramatically over glamorize being an entrepreneur in a
Yeah.
dangerous and misleading way as a society.
Yeah. Because it's like
And
that 0.1% of the
it's
successful, right?
it's
Like,
so hard. It's
yeah.
so hard.
Yeah.
It's just it's not a good way to make a living.
Mm.
However, it is a great way of living
Right.
because
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you care about what you're doing. Now, again, I told you I'm the only time because you care about the problem,
Hmm.
and care is like a root cause of giving you energy and purpose. And so it's like I was thinking about it like before. One of my definitions of success for a long time had been balancing all the things I want to do in life.
Yeah.
And I now believe, and I've worked really hard on this. You probably remember when you worked with me. Like I'm a very rigorous time
Yeah.
schedule, and I've tried every productivity hack there is, and I have now concluded that balance in life for an entrepreneur is not a thing. It's bullshit. I don't think it's true.
Mm.
Do not think it's possible.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. If you care about something so much that you feel compelled to live it all the time, it's like inherently going to throw off any sense of balance that you have. Like you're going to care about it knowing you're going to fail, you're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
That kind of care doesn't make for balance.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Hmm.
But it can fill you with a tremendous sense of energy and purpose. And I think that's why I like it in this context around culture and belief and identity, because you don't have to make a living out of being an entrepreneur. You can apply the idea of being an entrepreneur to something like, I wonder how I could help more people learn how to, you know, understand their sense of self if they're from like a Punjabi community. That's something that my wife and I talk about a lot. Like that would be a cool entrepreneurial project. Immediately conflating it with building $1 billion venture backed enterprise is stupid. Like it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Like it could be a nonprofit. It's still entrepreneurial. It could be an entrepreneurial pursuit for your own self. And I think you can get a lot of the benefits. In particular, in this area, you can find a lot of very valuable um, points of view that can do tremendous amounts of good for people without tying them to being, Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah. That's very insightful, and yeah, 100% agree. I mean, Sonny, I guess the last question, just to kind of wrap things up. Um, what's something that you're excited about, like something that you're looking for this year, right? It could be work, it could be outside,
Yeah, I'll tell you what I'm really excited about right now. It's like so nerdy, but
yeah,
it's tied into what I'm learning. I feel like I have finally discovered I've made a major I've had an epiphany around artificial intelligence and its purpose in um, how it can help humanity, and I'm really excited about it
cool.
because. But this is just what I'm thinking about right now, so I feel like I'll share it.
Yeah,
Um, we all know that like education's broken, and we all know that like we want to learn new things. It's obvious, everybody gets that. Like this.
mhm,
Then the second thing is, but now people are like, well, who needs AI if you have an infinitely smart computer in your pocket? And I'm like, that seems. Everyone kind of like that feels like a horrible idea,
yeah,
and it is a horrible idea. That's a terrible idea to not have to know things anymore because AI will just do it for you. That's a
right,
truly terrible idea when you think about it foundationally, because there's trust and more like agency, and like what's the point of life if you don't like try to like know things.
Critical
Um,
thinking. Yeah, for sure.
it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
So no, all of a sudden you would learn less and just be less informed. We can even have this conversation. So then what does it do? Well, it helps you learn better because there's just like we know that people don't care about grades in school. It's like, do you really care that your kid knows trigonometry? Like, truly, do you like care that they learn it? You care that they get a good grade potentially because you care
right.
about the outcomes of the grade, right?
Yeah,
You
getting
don't
a good
actually care
school.
about the knowledge base. And yet at the
Yeah,
same time, what we really care about, if you're any person, you care about people's well-being, like their physical and emotional well-being. And it's like we know that there are like things that you can learn. Then I realized like there's a field of science, like learning science is a real field of study. It's just like we learned how people put information in brains basically
mhm,
over the last 40 years. Great, whole field. No one ever changed how we learn. And now there are people who are doing it. And I'm involved. My kids go to this AI powered school. It's insane. Like they literally learn stuff incredibly fast. But they're learning like math and like Khan Academy. It's cool that they can learn math, but like you could learn anything that way. And AI can help you learn anything really quickly and really effectively. And and so I'm really excited in it, but it's very complex. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, I spend all of my waking hours, all day and night. I spend my time reading about like knowledge graphs and,
Hmm.
learning science and how AI can work and structure and build it. Because what we could do is turn around and build a framework that anyone could learn anything really effectively that they wanted to learn. So you could be like, I could learn Punjabi culture. You'd have to just define Punjabi culture, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, and I think we're at a really big breakthrough for, and then everyone can pick what they want to learn after Common Core. You could be like, I would love for my kids to learn about Aru's culture and my culture. And you're like, voila, here's the playbook.
Yeah.
And I think that is an incredibly thrilling way. And I know how to do it. I'm learning how to do it where you're like, oh, AI could help us be better human beings. Like I could teach my kids how to be more empathetic, and I can see how to do that. And nobody really talks about that
Yeah.
with a tactical solution. And I am incredibly excited. It's like the first time I saw you. Were you around when we saw the Bond writing machines?
Yeah. I remember seeing it.
Like the
Yeah.
first time you see it write in your own handwriting, it's kind of an
It's a
amazing.
moment.
It's
I
like a
remember seeing
magical
it.
moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
I am having that magical moment now where I'm like, oh man, you really could teach your child how to be kind to themselves. Like tactically, you could structure a program such with AI that they would learn a way that they would learn how to pick themselves up when they fall down. And I can't think that's like, what a gift. I'd try to give it away for free. Like you're like, you could change the course of humanity with programs like that. And I think that that to me is the most exciting thing that I can't wait to see if it works or not.
No, thanks for sharing, Sonny. And thank you for sharing your journey, your insights. I think honestly, yeah, your story exemplifies embracing one's identity and experiences and doing meaningful things. So I really appreciate your time, and this was a great conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you, man. I appreciate it. I'm always, as you know, I told you, I am a big fan of yours. You have many amazing things to contribute and have already done so. So, I'm really proud of what you're doing. This is hard work.
It
So,
is. It's hard, but rewarding and exciting. So very excited to be doing this. I appreciate
awesome.
it. Awesome. Thank you. So that was my conversation with Sonny Caberwal, an entrepreneur, father, and lifelong learner whose story highlights the power of embracing what makes you different. From growing up as one of the only Sikh families in his North Carolina town, to founding companies, starting a family, and now teaching kids how to build confidence, Sonny brings deep insight into identity, community, and creation. So we talked about the gift of difference, why first generation and immigrant communities raise some of the most resourceful founders, and how confidence isn't about perfection, but about being okay with getting it wrong and trying anyway. Sonny's story is a reminder that we don't have to leave parts of ourselves behind to create something meaningful. In fact, our lived experiences and the cultures where we come from can be the foundation of our greatest ideas. So, if this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. Share it with someone who might enjoy it, leave a comment or review, and follow the podcast for more stories like this. Thank you so much for listening to First Person, and see you very soon.